If it's Thursday, Ukrainian President Zelenskyy makes his case to a divided Washington with an urgent wartime plea to lawmakers, Pentagon officials, and the president for more aid and weapons. Plus, funding fight fiasco. The House is heading home after a key vote embarrassingly fails on the floor, with Speaker McCarthy complaining members of his own party want to, quote, burn down the whole place. And an NBC News exclusive interview on the trail with 2024 candidate and rising GOP star Vivek Ramaswamy as he courts controversy and tries to build momentum in the polls by out-Trumping Trump in the race for the White House. Welcome to Meet the Press Now. I'm Kristen Welker in New York. As divisions and dysfunction dominate in Washington, imperiling everything from government funding to the fate of Ukraine and its war against Russia, moments ago, Ukrainian President Zelenskyy arrived at the White House for an Oval Office meeting. His second visit to the White House in less than a year, and at any moment we expect the two leaders to hold a wider, expanded meeting with their advisors. It comes as Mr. Zelenskyy is barnstorming Washington with an urgent plea for more assistance and a warning that Russia will win if Congress doesn't step up. Zelenskyy began the day on Capitol Hill with a series of closed-door meetings as he tried to convince skeptical lawmakers, especially Republicans, to keep the aid flowing. Here's some of what he told reporters after huddling with members of Congress.
We spoke about a lot of different issues. We were happy that senators from Congress, White House, really the United States, of course, to support people of America, really support us. We supported from the first days of the war, and now together with us, and we spoke about everything, about support, about the situation on the battlefield, about our plans. I can't share with the media all the details, but I think we had very strong dialogue with senators.
Now, some Republicans seem swayed by Zelenskyy's pleas, but some didn't. Here's House Speaker Kevin McCarthy after the meetings with comments suggesting not enough House Republicans are fully on board.
I thought it was direct. I thought it was honest. I thought they were answering the questions we need. I think Zelenskyy has been making some changes that have been requested. He has a new defense minister. He got rid of 5 other individuals in there on the procurement side that I think have been giving people some doubt of what was happening. So I've seen some real movement. Look, we've got to get our fiscal house taken care of here in America. I'm more than willing to look at that. But the one thing I know is if the president's only focused on that, while you just had 10,000 people come across the border and he wants to ignore that, I think there are priorities here. I can walk and chew gum at the same time, but if he's only going to focus one place and not in America, I think he's focused in the wrong place.
One more thing, there's no way the Ukraine goes on the CR then, sir?
Look, right now, the CR we have does not have that.
Now, in stark contrast to Speaker McCarthy's hesitancy was a bipartisan chorus of lawmakers today urging Congress to rally around Ukraine.
There was a single sentence that summed it all up, and I'm quoting him verbatim. Mr. Zelenskyy said, if we don't get the aid, we will lose the war.
I thought he did a good job of laying it out, but make no mistake about it. Anybody that would say this war could be over in 24 hours, or anybody that says we don't need to support them for them to sustain the effort is not paying attention to the details. Yeah. This would be devastating.
They need it, and they're going to get it. I said, you know, the majority support this. I know there's some dissension on both sides, but I said a war of attrition is not going to win this. And that's what Putin wants, because he wants to break the will of the American people and the Europeans.
Now, amid it all, Zelenskyy's visit to Washington comes as the clock ticks down on a government shutdown in just 9 days, folks, with House Republicans in chaos and canceling votes for the rest of the week, as Speaker McCarthy is paralyzed by members of his own party. Joining me now to break all of this down is Ali Rafa from the White House, where the president and Zelenskyy are meeting right now, and Julie Sirkin is on Capitol Hill. Julie, let me start with you, because obviously we had this urgent plea from President Zelenskyy on Capitol Hill just a year, of course, after addressing a joint session of Congress. Talk us through what happened this time around. What was the reaction to President Zelenskyy?
Well, Kristen, I just want to start by sharing some conversation that I had with Senator Cynthia Lummis, who was actually one of the Republican lawmakers who voted against aid for Ukraine in the past. She came out of this closed-door briefing with Zelenskyy telling me that because of his words in there, specifically his answer to one question that was posed to him in this form, what do you say to our constituents who are concerned about this never-ending funnel of aid for Ukraine, this never-ending war? She told me Zelenskyy had his most compelling answer in that entire room. He said, because we will lose the war without the aid. You heard that from Schumer as well. And she told me she is now convinced that we have to stay in Ukraine, that the U.S. has to continue aiding Ukraine militarily and financially. And this is certainly a stark contrast from what we've heard from her and others in the past. Now, certainly there are some Republicans who were not in that meeting, including Senator J.D. Vance, who signed on to that letter to the White House, to the budget director, saying that they will not support additional Ukraine aid. Senator Tillis, who you heard from there on the screen, he actually told me that maybe those senators would have benefited from hearing from Zelenskyy directly as to what he is using the aid for and how much he relies on it. And all in all, we have to not forget that this is a very small minority of Republican lawmakers, of lawmakers who will not support additional aid from Ukraine. 28 were on that letter. One senator had told me he estimates it about 30 total in the House and the Senate. An overwhelming majority of them do support additional aid for Ukraine. And I think that Zelenskyy, based on my conversations with lawmakers in the House, in the Senate, did an effective job. He was able to be personally persuasive with these lawmakers and to make his case for why he needs this aid and what he's going to do with it to win this war, hopefully, in his eyes.
Julie, it's such fascinating reporting because I think you underscore how compelling it is to have him there in person. And Allie, let me go to you now at the White House, because obviously, as we said at the top, President Zelenskyy and President Biden did have an initial bilateral meeting, and now they're having an expanded meeting. Talk through what came out of that first meeting, and again, the significance of him being there face to face, making his case, pressing for more aid, more military equipment in person.
Yeah, Kristen, we have some notes from reporters who were in the room when this meeting between President Zelenskyy and Biden started in the Oval Office. They say that these two ignored shouted questions, but they did give a few brief remarks. The president saying that no nation will be secure if we don't stand up to this invasion. He reiterated the importance of building this coalition of support among Western allies for Ukraine long term. He told Zelenskyy his bravery has inspired the world. He said he's determined to show the world that support will continue long term. Zelenskyy, for his part, thanked both the president and Congress for the discussions that they've had today. And they said that the pair will discuss weapons with attention on those air defense capabilities. And that's the big focus today. The Ukrainian president trying to go in to this meeting, these meetings today, trying to be able to give a granular level of detail, a battlefield perspective straight from Ukraine's commander-in-chief, to be able to let these officials and specifically the president understand what the country is going through as, you know, it makes progress in its counteroffensive, but also as Russia continues to make progress in how much support it's getting from its allies. You know, we know that Iran has been sending drones to Russia. There are discussions with North Korea over supplying munitions to be able to help them win this war. And so that's the focus that Zelenskyy is going into this meeting with. The question is how the president continues to keep this support fresh in people's minds. As we know, support has been slipping, not just among that group of House Republicans, as you heard Julie lay out there, but also in poll after poll, we see that the American public remains divided on whether to continue supplying aid to Ukraine as its war really has no end in sight. Remember, this has even become part of the 2024 campaign trail. This was a big point of discussion during the first Republican primary debate, with even the Republican primary candidates divided over whether to continue doing this. So this is only expected to continue growing as far as controversy is concerned. But Zelenskyy hoping to leave today with at least the assurance of that longer-term support. We know that the president is committing to new aid today, $325 million worth. But those longer-range missiles, those bigger munitions, sanctions. That is something that President Zelenskyy has said Ukraine cannot win this war without. Whether the president can match that expectation and match this commitment is something we're watching.
Julie, let me go back to you on that point, because you mapped out the fact that obviously there's this opposition. Ali points to the fact that it is becoming a growing issue on the GOP campaign trail. To what extent are there still persuadable Republicans, those holdouts? You said it's not the majority, but there's still that small group of holdouts. And could that hold up the broader spending package? I mean, do you expect this to in any way be a part of any continuing resolution that passes to keep the government open?
Yeah, I'll work backward there, Kristen, because there are ongoing meetings. In fact, right now I just came from a huddle in the top leadership in the House Republicans office as they're trying to figure out if they can actually include Ukraine aid in any kind of short-term government funding bill. That remains a live ball. At the same time, though, listen, I talked to a senator about this who told me if it stands alone, it stands alone. It'll have enough support to pass. So the question in their mind is not when, is not if, but when, rather. Now, on your first point, if there are any Republicans who are persuadable, Senator Josh Hawley actually attended the briefing today. He said his mind was not changed. Senator Tom Tillis afterwards had told me he doesn't understand why Zelenskyy would even waste his time trying to change the mind of someone like Josh Hawley. Rather, he should focus his efforts, as he has today, on the overwhelming majority of members who do support additional aid for Ukraine. So that's just an interesting dynamic to watch there. It'll be interesting to see as well if some of those holdouts do end up coming on board, but at this point, not too likely.
All right, well, great way to start us off. Thank you very much, Ali and Julie. Appreciate it. Now, from the White House, joining me is John Kirby, Strategic Communications Coordinator for the National Security Council. Admiral Kirby, it is great to see you. Thank you for being with me. I really appreciate it.
You bet. Glad to be here.
I want to talk about those holdouts, those Republican holdouts. As you know, a growing number of them saying, hold on a minute, we can't just be writing a blank check, including Senator J.D. Vance, who said this in a letter to OMB, quote, how do you, based on the information you're getting, how do you think the counteroffensive is going? And are the Ukrainians closer to victory than they were 6 months ago? Based on this letter that we're getting from OMB, let me just, from J.D. Vance, I should say, can you just answer some of these questions? Do you think that Ukrainians are any closer to victory than they were 6 months ago? Is the counteroffensive any more effective than it was when it started?
Well, it's a shame that the senator didn't take advantage of the opportunity to listen to President Zelenskyy himself today, who I am absolutely certain was updating members of Congress about progress on the battlefield. But let me take a shot at it, because we obviously monitor as best we can. The truth is that the Ukrainian armed forces, particularly in the south, are making steady progress. Now, is it as far or as fast as they want to go, coming out of Zaporizhia towards the coast of the Sea of Azov? No. And they'd be the first to tell you that. I'm sure President Zelenskyy shared that perspective. The Russians had months to dig entrenchments, what we call defense in depth. They have literally put up tens of thousands of mines and minefields all across that southern expanse to try to slow the Ukrainians down, and it has certainly had an effect on them. But they are making progress, and one of the reasons they're making progress, first of all, it's obviously because of their skill and bravery and the fact that they're allocating resources to this advance, but is because of the tools, the training, and the technology that the United States and our allies and partners have lent them, have given them, have provided them to be able to make that progress. So look, we always knew this was going to be a tough slog, Kristen. It's hard to be perfectly predictive. It has proven to be violent, and it has proven to be tough going. But the Ukrainians are making progress, and they should be commended for that.
Well, one of the points that J.D. Vance raises is that it's not clear what the exit strategy is. So can you speak to that point, to that concern? What's the strategy? What's the exit plan here for the U.S.?
Well, again, I'm not exactly clear what the senator's referring to. Normally, when you talk about exit strategy, you're talking about getting American troops out of a war zone, that kind of thing. It's important to remember that we don't have American troops in Ukraine. Ukrainians are on their soil, and they're fighting for every inch of it. So I don't think they plan on going anywhere.
Military aid. We are providing the military aid and obviously financial aid.
They aren't planning on going anywhere. And the United States is committed to supporting Ukraine for as long as it takes to succeed on the battlefield. So if by exit strategy he's talking about an end of the war, I'd offer this. Mr. Putin could end it today if he just pulled his troops out of Ukraine where they don't belong. That probably isn't going to happen. The Ukrainians want this to end immediately, and we all want to see this war end. But it's got to end on terms that President Zelenskyy and the Ukrainian people can accept. Their country has been invaded. Imagine how Americans would react if it was on our soil. They want Russian forces out of their soil. We want to help them succeed on the battlefield so that if and when President Zelenskyy, and only President Zelenskyy can determine when it's time to sit down with President Putin, that he can sit down and have a diplomatic dialogue with the wind at his back and with some strength.
Are you satisfied, is the administration satisfied, Admiral, with the level of accountability that you have seen from Ukraine, effectively how the weapons are being used?
We are constantly working with the Ukrainians on the issue of oversight, and we have staffed up the embassy in Kyiv with additional folks from the Department of Defense to help the Ukrainians with improving oversight and accountability. So we all recognize that there's a desire for that. We've shared that desire from the very beginning because we know this is expensive material, and we want to make sure that it's being used appropriately. Once it gets into Ukraine, it is going into a war zone. It belongs to the Ukrainians. That's point number one. And number two, it's being used in a war, and war is unpredictable. And so the idea that every single bullet can be perfectly accounted for, I think, is an extreme concern here. But we obviously do share the concerns of members of Congress about accountability, and we are working very hard with Ukraine to that end.
And Admiral, what's the strategy to deal with waning support, not just here in the U.S., but globally? Obviously, the president just left the G20 summit, which couldn't agree on language condemning Russia. How do you continue to keep people engaged in this fight?
We got to keep getting him exposed to President Zelenskyy and letting him, he's the best messenger, letting him have an opportunity like he had today on Capitol Hill to explain what they're doing and why it matters to them. But also, the president's not missing any opportunities to talk about Ukraine in a full-throated way and defending what we're trying to do and why it matters. And you heard that on Tuesday at his speech at the UN General Assembly, a very, very comprehensive discussion about why this war matters. And the president said it's not just, although first and foremost it is, about Ukrainians and Ukrainian sovereignty. It is about the message it sends to Putin and would-be aggressors if we just walk away, if we just let him have Ukraine, Kristen, which is what he still wants. He doesn't believe they ought to exist as a nation state. If we just let him have it, where does it stop? He'll be right up on the eastern flank of NATO. And if you think that the cost of supporting Ukraine is high right now, imagine how much higher that cost is going to be in blood and treasure to the United States if, in fact, Mr. Putin is emboldened and wants to go after a NATO country or some other would-be aggressor is willing to start another war somewhere.
Let me move on to yesterday's bilateral meeting with Prime Minister Netanyahu and President Biden. Obviously, they discussed this potential deal which would normalize relations between Israel and Saudi Arabia. Now, Mr. Netanyahu is saying the countries could forge what's called he's calling an historic peace. How close are all sides to a deal? Because it's my understanding there are some key sticking points.
In any major set of negotiations, there's going to be sticking points, and you're going to have to work through them. And our diplomats, they're working on this very hard. We think that a more integrated Israel to the region is good. It's good for the region. It's good for the Israeli people. It's good for our national security interests. We want to see normalization proceed. We also recognize that the two big parties here are the parties in question, Saudi Arabia and Israel, and they have to make these sovereign decisions for themselves. We understand that. But we are talking to all parties to see if there's some negotiation that can be had. I can tell you we're working at it very, very aggressively, but I'm unable to give you like a timeline or sort of where that sits on the calendar. All I can tell you is that we believe this is in everybody's best interest to move forward to normalization.
Just to pin you down a little bit, are you optimistic there will be a deal ultimately?
I am optimistic that that everybody sees the benefits, and I mean all parties, not just us, that all parties see the benefit in some potential move towards normalization. But again, I don't, nothing's done until it's all done, and I don't want to get ahead of where we are in the process.
Very quickly, it would arguably isolate Iran, but it doesn't deal directly with their nuclear program, which has been advancing in recent years after the Iran nuclear deal was ripped up. So how do you address that part of that crisis in the region.
Look, normalization between Israel and Saudi Arabia would send a powerful signal to the mullahs in Iran about how much further isolated they are and could potentially lead to increased pressure on Iran. Nobody's turning a blind eye to their destabilizing behavior, including their nuclear ambitions. And as President Biden has said, we are not going to allow Iran to achieve a nuclear weapon capability. We'd prefer to do that through diplomacy, but that diplomacy right now is moribund, Kristen, because the Iranians have not negotiated in good faith. They started larding up the talks with all kinds of things that didn't matter to the nuclear program. So it's a moribund process right now. We got to make sure, and we have, that the president has additional options available to him to make sure that we can't allow Iran to ever achieve a nuclear weapon.
All right, John Kirby, thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it.
You bet.
First, failure on the floor. We are live on Capitol Hill, where House lawmakers are now headed home for the week after the GOP failed to advance a key bill to fund the military as Congress counts down to a potential government shutdown. We'll delve into all of that from the Hill. You're watching Meet the Press now. Welcome back. Another day, another embarrassing setback for House Republicans as they continue to try and fail to get their members on the same page with just 9 days until a government shutdown. Earlier today, a vote to advance a non-controversial bill to fund the military failed a second straight time on the House floor, with a handful of Republicans defying leadership yet again. Speaker Kevin McCarthy spoke to reporters after the fiasco, suggesting he'd been blindsided by some of the defections, leaving his speakership essentially paralyzed by members of his own party. Listen.
It's frustrating in the sense that I don't understand why anybody votes against bringing the idea and having the debate. And then you've got all the amendments if you don't like the bill. This is a whole new concept of individuals that just want to burn the whole place down. That doesn't work. Look, I know it's an obstacle, but I find it as a challenge, and we're going to solve it.
Now, this all comes after House Speaker McCarthy claimed his conference had made, quote, tremendous progress at a meeting last night. It leaves McCarthy in an increasingly dire position as the House is done for the week with no clear plan to pass anything with Republican votes. And it's making some of the rank and file angry. Here's New York's Mike Lawler.
For my colleagues, they have to come to a realization if they're unable or unwilling to govern, others will. There needs to be a realization that you're not going to get everything you want. And just throwing a temper tantrum and stomping your feet, frankly, not only is it wrong, it's just pathetic.
NBC's Ryan Nobles has the very latest from Capitol Hill. Ryan, some real fireworks there, and we don't usually hear Speaker McCarthy get that fired up, quite frankly. You could hear the frustration in his voice after these two votes failed. What happened here that we are at a place where the House is now going home, which makes a shutdown look increasingly likely? What happened?
Well, first of all, Kristen, we are talking to some members that are suggesting that perhaps they're going to find a way to stay here this weekend because of the situation that we find ourselves in, although there are other members of Congress who already seem to be on their way out of town. So, we're in this position basically because there is a group of roughly 5 to 10 conservative Republicans who just will not pass a continuing resolution. And as a result, they are then holding hostage every other piece of legislation that the Congress is trying to get over the finish line, including this defense appropriations bill, the spending bill to fund the Department of Defense, which is loaded with conservative, almost culture war issues that really have no hope of passing the Senate. It's a very conservative bill. But because they're concerned about the other spending bills, these House conservatives have basically paralyzed all the work in the House of Representatives. Here's what a smattering of them said today about the reason that they're holding everything up.
They can't count. That's what it means. As I said, we are completely dysfunctional. And folks are going to have to start realizing that in our conference, and they're going to have to take this stuff serious because they're obviously not. And there's been promises made and promises that weren't kept, and there's some people upset about it.
Until they're able to meet my red lines, they're not going to have my vote. As far as the CR, we had an over 2-hour meeting. And what I heard in the meeting is there were 7 or 8 people that were a no on it. And so to me, it's dead in the water unless they change something.
So to put this in plain English, Kristen, in order to move the continuing resolution, which would keep the government open past September 30th, but only for a short period of time, Kevin McCarthy needs to come up with a bill that 218 Republicans will vote for, because he's not going to get any Democratic bill for the type of bill Republicans would support. At this point, he does not have those votes, and as a result, nothing is happening.
Ryan, just to, again, put this into, as you say, plain English for our viewers, he has tried to offer them a number of carrots, border security. He's tried to lower the top line number. I mean, is there anything here? Is there anything left that he has in his toolkit to try to take out at this point to get members on the same page?
If there were, Kristen, I think he would have employed it by now, and I think that is why you are starting to see this new level of frustration, public frustration, from these moderates like Mike Lawler, who you played sound from earlier, who have, for the most part, have allowed McCarthy to basically play footsie with these House conservatives, just basically to get the ball moved down the field until they can get to a place where they can have substantive conversations with Democrats. Well, it seems as though every time he gives them what they want, they ask for more. The goalposts keep changing, to put as many sports metaphors as I can into this conversation. And that has got to be a situation where Kevin McCarthy just doesn't know what else to do. But the one thing we haven't talked about, Kristen, which is the reason perhaps why all this is happening, is that cloud of the potential motion to vacate, that move that any one member of Congress can put out the floor that would put his speakership in danger. That is why he has to capitulate to these House conservatives, and that's probably the reason we're in the situation we are in right now.
Ryan Nobles, fantastic reporting as always, as the government shutdown looks increasingly likely with each passing day. We appreciate your great reporting. Coming up next, we're on the trail with Republican presidential candidate Vivek Ramaswamy as he tries to capitalize on a bump in the primary polls amid some highly controversial remarks about undocumented immigrants. We're live in Battleground, Ohio with that exclusive interview next. You're watching Meet the Press Now. Welcome back. 2024 Republican primary candidate Vivek Ramaswamy is trying to seize on some post-debate political momentum, rising to second place behind former President Trump in a new poll out of New Hampshire today. We'll break down those numbers in just a moment. But first, NBC's Dasha traveled to Ramaswamy's Ohio campaign headquarters for an exclusive interview with the controversial candidate.
He's a political newcomer rising in the polls.
You have no foreign policy experience, and it shows. And you know what? It shows.
Ahead of politicians with longer, stronger resumes.
I'll be very frank about this. I am not surprised by our rise. The people in our Republican primary base, we're hungry for national unity, actually. I think it's a different philosophy of how to get there.
His style and his politics drawing comparisons to another one-time political newcomer.
President Trump, I believe, was the best president of the 21st century.
Pumping out content that, like Trump, is often baseless and creates controversy. Recently calling Congresswoman Ayanna Pressley a, quote, modern grand wizard of the modern KKK, saying the government lied about 9/11 and suggesting federal agents were involved in the January 6th attack on the Capitol.
You know, when you say stuff like that, you're smart.
I know it's going to be controversial.
You know
it's going to be controversial. So I think it is healthy for our country to have open, radically honest and candid conversations.
You said at one point in one of your gaggles, and you're like, I just sometimes like say things off the cuff.
I'm just honestly answering off the cuff.
How much do you literally mean what you say? Because sometimes it feels like you just kind of like say things.
None of us can have it always, right? You can't be radically candid and then also filter what you say when. And if I'm giving a serious speech about shutting down the administrative state, as we did recently, we intend to follow that through. In other cases, I also believe in moments of levity that are honest, that open up candid dialogue. I'm not saying things I don't mean, but that doesn't mean that that's a bedrock part of my policy agenda to drive forward either.
Many of Ramaswamy's policy ideas are polarizing. He has proposed deporting the American-born children of undocumented immigrants along with their parents, children who are American citizens under the 14th Amendment.
So I want to give you my full perspective on this issue because I will acknowledge this is a difficult question. And what makes this a difficult question is that many people who are in this country illegally are still good people who came here for a better life for their family. And I think the only way we're going to be able to stand as a nation really committed to the rule of law is to behave in a manner that actually means it.
But is this a cold turkey rip? Like, is it people?
It has to be. But I think that.
Okay.
But I think that we will provide a path back through legal meritocratic immigration for those who have demonstrated themselves to be law-abiding, contributing citizens of this country.
But to be clear, you're talking about people who only speak English, who have lived in the United States their entire lives, are now going back to Guatemala, Venezuela, to countries that they know nothing about.
So
they
you are
don't speak
picking
the
the
language.
exception rather than the norm in the hard case. But to be frank,
No, but there are
the answer
thousands of
includes yes.
these people in the United States.
So I think the right answer is we have to stand for the rule of law.
Ramaswamy, whose parents are legal immigrants, himself gained citizenship by birthright.
Did your father also take the citizenship test, and is your father a citizen?
He did not, and that's a choice that he has made for familial reasons, but my mother did.
So your father is not a citizen of the United States?
He's not.
Okay. And your mother, when did your mom take the citizenship test? Was it before or after you were born?
After I was born.
His wife, Apurva, is also an immigrant and a throat surgeon at Ohio State University. The couple has 2 young boys. And not unlike some of his opponents, Apurva initially questioned her husband's readiness.
Is this the right time for our family? And then on a larger scale, are you the best version of yourself to be filling this, extremely important office? We didn't see anyone, and that's when we realized that at some point you have to step up and do it yourself.
But poll after poll shows former President Trump with a commanding lead in the Republican primary.
A ton of the voters at your events say they like you. They're voting for Trump.
I do think that I will be able to convince the America First base that I'm part of, that I'm best positioned to actually lead this nation forward.
NBC News correspondent Dasha Burns joins me now. Fascinating conversation. Dasha, congratulations on a really great interview. Take us behind the scenes of the Ramaswamy campaign, because I think you really hit the nail on the head there, which is he is surging in the polls, and yet former President Trump still has this commanding lead. What are they saying about that? And realistically, do they think he has a shot?
Well, it's interesting to look at those Trump comparisons because you even see and feel that at their campaign headquarters. You remember back in 2015 and 2016, Trump was such a non-traditional candidate. He really shook the media landscape, and he found his own way to talk to voters directly and constantly through Twitter. Well, Vivek is doing his own version of that. You go to his campaign headquarters, which is a former barn, by the way, and where there used to be horse stables. Now there's a podcast studio, there's a TV production studio where he's producing a seemingly endless stream of content where he does spout some of those controversial comments that we talked about there. But that is his way of directly talking to those voters and really making his case. And that's how he's really starting to stand out. Unlike some of those other candidates that have maybe avoided the media in some ways, he's saying the more the merrier. Let's talk to everybody and let's do it kind of constantly, Kristen.
It's really fascinating conversation, Dasha. I want to pivot a little bit because I know you've also been covering the abortion fight in Ohio. The state Supreme Court there recently handed a partial victory to Republicans on ballot language this week. Break down what the key takeaways are there.
Yeah, and a bit of a blow to abortion rights advocates. The state Supreme Court said that the words unborn child can be used on the ballot in November. This is something that Ohioans for Reproductive Freedoms were arguing against. They wanted to use the word fetus, which they believe is the right language because it is the language actually used in the full text of the amendment. But the Supreme Court said it's fine. The words unborn child will be on the amendment. Abortion rights advocates say this is potentially going to mislead voters. So a blow for those abortion rights advocates. But Kristen, political scientists that I talked to said that this may or may not have a huge impact because this is an issue where people are pretty entrenched, and you saw that pretty overwhelming victory in that special election in August. It's a bit of a bellwether for what we might see in November. So not necessarily a huge setback, but certainly not what those abortion rights advocates were looking for here. And by the way, we did talk to Ramaswamy about his position on abortion. You can see the full interview and that exchange as well on NBCnews.com.
Yeah, obviously continues to be front and center in the GOP primary race, and we know that both sides will be pouring a lot of money into that ballot measure fight in Ohio. Dasha Burns, thank you for covering all the angles for us. Appreciate it. Great to see you. After the break, DeSantis descending and Trump's thumping of the field. We've got a new batch of battleground and early state polls with less than 1 week to go until the second debate. You're watching Meet the Press now. Welcome back. Staying on the 2024 campaign trail, we have some new poll numbers from the two most important primary contests for Republicans. In Iowa, Donald Trump continues to lead the primary field by more than 30 points, according to a new Fox Business poll. The biggest movement in that poll since July is Nikki Haley making it to double digits and into third place. And in New Hampshire, Donald Trump is up 26 points on a pack of 4 Republicans, hovering in the low double digits in a new CNN UNH poll. But the biggest headline comes from Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, who's plummeting from a strong second to fifth place at the back of the pack. DeSantis lost support across the board, but a big reason for this drop is his standing among moderates, dropping 20 points since July. Joining me to break this all down on Sept is Maria Teresa Kumar, president and CEO of Voto Latino and an NBC News contributor, and Noah Rothman, senior writer at National Review. Thank you so much for being here. I appreciate it. So, Noah, let me start with you. Let's start with these new poll numbers. Let's put them up again and just get a sense of where the field is, because it really is stunning to see this drop by DeSantis plummeting in the polls. 46% for Donald Trump, 15% for Ron DeSantis. And you have Chris Christie. Well, this is the Iowa poll. But in New Hampshire, Chris Christie is surging.
Yeah, so there's a couple of dynamics at work here. The first is the mechanics of the campaign. The DeSantis campaign has invested heavily in Iowa, not in New Hampshire. And the opposite is true of Nikki Haley. She's invested heavily in New Hampshire, not so much in Iowa. And all the campaigns will tell you, we want to win everywhere. That is not true. I think it's kind of a foolish strategy to prioritize some states over others, especially moving into South Carolina, where we're going to have a multi-car pileup if all the candidates that are presently in the race are still in the race. But the second is messaging. And Ron DeSantis has made it rather known that he believes his pathway to the nomination is through Trump voters, not anti-Trump voters. He wants to peel off the parts of the Trump coalition that are a little tenuous and then work backwards to try to assemble an anti-Trump coalition from that part of the party. That may prove to have been a failure of a strategy. You could, if you had assembled a more durable, viable coalition of anti-Trump voters first and then presented that bulwark, a smaller but nevertheless impressive on paper coalition, it might have presented more of a threat to Donald Trump. The campaign's not over.
Right.
But it's not looking great.
Well, to that point, to Noah's point, you have DeSantis trying to get Trump voters, and people are saying, wait a minute, those aren't the gettable voters. Moderate Republicans, particularly in a state like New Hampshire, are the gettable voters, and a 6-week abortion ban doesn't necessarily play very well for them.
Well, and if you're basically someone saying, well, I am not Trump, but I'm like Trump, all the voters are going to say, well, why would I go with the offshoot if I could go for the original? And you're absolutely right. The moderate voter was his base. It was DeSantis basically saying, I'm not going to do all the crazy things or say all the crazy things that Trump says out loud, but I'm going to make you comfortable enough to vote for me. And instead, he went right of Trump. You know how hard that is to do? Whether we're most recently, I was going to say, whether we're talking about abortion or we're talking about immigration, you go down the list. I mean, he is more anti-business than the business president in a place like Florida, and people are paying attention, and I don't think that he goes very far. Yes, a political campaign right now is the beginning, and we have a long runway. But I think he's basically failed. And what I'm looking for among the Republican candidates that remain is, are they going to start doing backroom deals to say, we are in it not just for the presidency, but for democracy, to consolidate themselves? Because otherwise, that's the only way Trump wins, is through a crowded field.
Do you ever see that happening, Noah? And the fact that Trump is still so far out ahead, I mean, can he be stopped at this point?
There's a lot of game left to play. I don't think we can predict into the future precisely how Donald Trump will campaign, because he's not campaigning. He's running a front porch campaign for the most part. He's not articulating policy preferences. There would be no coalescing effort around the terms that you say, that you've established, around democracy. Republicans don't think that way. They don't agree with that framing
But
of
that's how the Republicans did not get their red wave, because moderate independent Republicans actually did believe in democracy. And had one of those people basically talked to that, I think there would have been that red wave that everybody was counting on.
I mean, going back to 2022, insofar as we had a variety of candidates, particularly at the statewide level, that underperformed, all of them shared one particular disadvantage, which was their fealty to the notion that 2020 was a flawed election. That stuff just does not register with voters. They don't believe it. They don't understand what the argument is, and they sort of reject the paranoia around it. Trump voters, by the way, I'm sorry I'm interrupting, the Trump voters are busily convincing themselves that the 2020 stuff is fine.
Yeah.
It's abortion that really hurts. It's the post-Dobbs environment that really hurts us. All these pro-lifers, they're what's dragging us down. Tell that to Mike DeWine. Tell that to Governor Kemp in Georgia. Tell that to Ron DeSantis. It's a complicated narrative.
What's your take on that, Maria Teresa, and the overall issue of abortion, which is looming so large over this primary and general?
Right. Well, one of the things that I remember right after the Dobbs decision was a Fox poll saying that dads were the ones that were most disturbed about this idea that the rights for their daughter were going to be taken away. And I do think that came out at the end of the day for the midterm elections. But when you also have a conversation with these dads, when you talk to independent and moderate Republicans, they were also concerned with what they saw very visibly on January 6th hearings, that someone had done wrong with democracy. And that didn't make them feel comfortable. Now, did it drive them out to vote? No, but I think it did allow them to take a step back and start paying attention to the election.
Well, and we know that democracy is obviously going to be one of President Biden's key focuses. What struck me, I sat down, obviously, with former President Trump. I asked him about this issue of abortion, and the White House responded immediately amid concerns that he's trying to moderate his message. He's the person who appointed these three Supreme Court justices who made it possible to overturn Roe v. Wade. I mean, Noah, he's looking squarely at the general election at this point, even though, as you say, there's still a lot of runway left.
Which is justifiable. And, you know, to be a little bit perhaps paranoid or conspiratorial about it, I saw the president's messaging for the White House that Donald Trump is responsible for the end of Roe, and he would go further, directly contradicting what the former president said to you. The president, Joe Biden, is essentially reassuring perhaps a little squeamish pro-life voters, no, this guy's on your side. This guy's one of you. When he's saying he is not, that certainly advances Donald Trump's prospects, which from the perspective of a Democratic White House might be a good thing.
Maria Teresa, give your response, then I want to move on to what came out of the White House.
I think one of the things is that if we've ever seen anything from Donald Trump is that he knows how to play to the moment. And anything he says, he cannot really be held accountable because he doesn't hold himself accountable. And so he recognizes right now, after the midterm elections, that abortion was not a winning prospect for independent moderate men. He says it openly. And he says it openly. So he's like, wait a second, let me tact. But it doesn't mean that that's not what he's going to perform, because at the end of the day, he's still going to need the evangelicals to continue if he were to win for the next midterms. So I would hold my breath saying that he's going to hold fast on his position on abortion.
Well,
just again, because we've seen receipts.
Let me pivot quickly. The Biden administration just gave Venezuelan migrants temporary protected status. The impact of that, Maria Teresa?
I will say the Democrats right now have such a complicated relationship with immigration. And it is an issue where it's wonderful that they're providing protective status for these Venezuelans, but that is not our policy when it comes to immigration. But the moment that someone gets here, that has become sticky. We actually have an international crisis, and I think that the Democrats need to start addressing it, because at the end of the day, the people who will be the voters are the people that have loved ones that have been here for 30 years, who are essential workers, who are saying, it's great that you're providing these people with temporary visas. What about my parents who have been here as essential workers and are still in limbo, especially after what the president said, Trump said today, basically saying that he was going to deport anyone that may be a gang member who's over 14 years old. I mean, that should scare everybody.
Potential for backlash on both sides. Thank you both so much for a great conversation. Maria Teresa and Noah, appreciate it. And still to come, the former ambassador to Ukraine joins me next to discuss President Zelensky's wartime trip to Washington. Don't go anywhere. You're watching Meet the Press now.
Mr. President, the brave people of Ukraine, and that's not hyperbole, the people of Ukraine have shown enormous bravery, has inspired the world, literally inspired the world with their determination to defend these principles. And together with our partners and allies, the American people are determined to see to it that we do all we can to ensure the world stands with you, and that is our overwhelming objective.
Welcome back. That was President Biden just moments ago reiterating his support for Ukraine during a meeting with President Zelenskyy in the Oval Office. For more, I'm joined by Bill Taylor, who served as U.S. ambassador to Ukraine during the George W. Bush administration. He's now vice president of Russia and Europe at the U.S. Institute of Peace. Ambassador Taylor, thank you so much for joining me. I really appreciate it.
Kristen, thanks for having me.
Talk to me about how concerned you are about the fact that support for Ukraine seems to be waning, particularly among Republicans on Capitol Hill.
Well, Kristen, the purpose of President Zelensky's visit here today and to New York yesterday to the UN was to address exactly that. He's convinced that the United States is key to his victory. He's still convinced that he can achieve that victory over the Russians, but he does need the United States. The United States leads the alliance and the coalition, the broad coalition. So this is a very important stop for him. And he reads the polls, he reads the press. He knows that there are voices in some parts of the United States and the Congress that are opposed to supplying assistance, additional assistance to Ukraine. However, he also knows that so far, and indeed he's seen today in his meetings with both the House and the Senate, so far it's bipartisan support for Ukraine and strong support for the assistance that he's providing, strong opposition to what the Russians are doing. The Russians are invading his country, so he knows that he's got the moral high ground and the support of the American people. So I think that's what he's here. So far, he's made that point.
Those who are holdouts for more aid to Ukraine say that one of their big concerns is that there's not enough transparency around how this aid is being used. Do you think that there should be a better accounting for how U.S. aid and military aid is actually being deployed?
There is no doubt that the transparency, the ability to account for all of the assistance that's going in there is very important. And no one knows this better than the Ukrainians. They understand that with that kind of accountability, with that kind of transparency, with that zero tolerance for corruption, that's what they need to maintain the trust of the United States and to keep the assistance coming. So far, they've been able to do that. He's demonstrated, President Zelenskyy has demonstrated that he doesn't have tolerance for any corruption, and he's gotten rid of people in his administration who have not met that standard.
When you look at Europe and the support there, the fact that Poland says it's now ending its military support for Ukraine, what are the broader implications of that? And what's the message to the rest of the region? I mean, are you concerned that the rest of the region might start to pull back as well?
So, Kristen, I was just in Brussels. Before that, I was in Kyiv just last week. And the support for Ukraine in Europe is strong, is very strong. The Polish situation is complicated. They've got an election coming up. And they've got farmers who are not pleased that the Ukrainian grain is coming into Poland. So the election situation there is making this thing. Now, when they say they stopped the flow of weapons, the Poles have provided an incredible amount of weapons. Indeed, all the weapons that they have been able to provide have gone in. So there's a temporary pause in that flow from Poland into Ukraine. But no, I'm not worried about the support for Ukraine coming from the Europeans. Europeans maintain that strength.
And let me go now to Estonia, where the Estonian Defense Ministry official said this to The Economist, quote, "This is exactly what a war of attrition is about. Convince the West that we can outsuffer you, we can outfight you, we can outlast you. They know the weak points of democracies." Do you agree with that?
I agree that the Russians' only strategy is to wait us out. The Russians' only strategy is try to wait for us to blink, to get tired, for the Ukrainians to blink, to get tired. The Ukrainians are not getting tired. The Ukrainians are tired, let me be clear, but they're not giving up. They will not give up. We should not give up either.
Ambassador Bill Taylor, it is always good to have you on. Thank you for your perspective. We really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, Kristen. Good to see you.
You too. And I am back tomorrow with more Meet the Press Now. NBC News Now coverage continues with Hallie Jackson right now.
Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or follow us on social media.